Ho!
Yeehaw!
We are the Timecode Cowboys, and we'd like to welcome you back. Today we're interviewing a good friend of mine, John Heath,
John Heath.
fellow filmmaker, fellow multi-generational Hollywood person.
Yes, and actually John's got us beat because
He does.
Not only 3 generations, but 4 on his side.
That's right.
And then he's also got siblings and cousins who work in the industry. I was actually...
Brother.
Yeah, it's crazy. The family tree is wide and deep with him in the film industry. So we get into it. We have a good talk. Al, tell us why'd you reach out to John? Why is he our first guest?
Well, I've known John for a long time, and John was instrumental in helping my career move forward because he was so open and willing to share what he knew as an editor down the hall from where I was working. And we've known each other for years and stayed friends all through that time. But like every guest, we asked them about some movies that they want to talk about. And John's picks were Miller's Crossing.
Yep.
So Danny and I did a little homework and we watched Miller's Crossing, and we're going to talk to John about it today, and kind of looking forward to seeing what everybody thinks.
We nerded out. We geeked out. We broed down.
We
It was a good
cowboyed
time.
down.
We did.
Wait, cowboy up, right?
We cowboyed down.
Down. Also, we'd like to thank our sponsors,
Yes.
if we had any. So
hey,
if you're out there,
sponsors, this is where this is
come on.
for
We
you
would
guys.
say nothing but glowing
where
things
we
about
can-
whatever it is you want us to.
Say.
Do you want to
Yeah,
sponsor?
let us be the putty in your hands. Let us be the puppets, and you the puppeteers. We are ready to tub thump.
We're
for
willing to
anything
learn.
out there. We're pretty ethically ambiguous. We have no moral code. As cowboys, we roam. And listen, we'll we'll sell whatever snake oil you got. So just tell
Hey,
us.
that's
yeah.
snake oil.
I know. I'm joking.
We're joking,
No,
but,
really,
but
actually,
in all
sponsors
seriousness,
hit us up.
we would love to have a sponsor.
Sponsors hit us up.
In the meantime, we're doing this all by ourselves because we love it,
Yep.
and we hope you do too.
Yeehaw! Let's get into the convo.
So this is going to be like watching a tennis match for me.
Well, I know.
We'll be going back and forth.
You could just stare straight ahead, and we'll try to.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll cheat it for camera.
Trust me, we did spend a lot of time like trying to figure out the right configuration.
Yeah.
We just
And we just realized people,
Yeah.
if they're watching it,
Yeah.
they're really listening to it. They're not really watching
Because
it.
I'm the center of attention.
You're the
You are, yeah.
You're our guest.
Yeah, you got the spotlight on you.
I do have to say, and I wanted to save it until we were rolling, that I did watch the first episode, and you guys were great.
Oh, thank you.
And in so many ways, not because it was a good show, which it was entertaining and fun, is that your relationship.
Oh, good.
As
I'm glad
father
that
and
it's
son.
nice to hear that from somebody who's not in our family.
Yeah, and doesn't have a good relationship with his father. No, actually, I did. We got along fine. But no, it was great. It was great to see your relationship, and clearly you guys have done this for years. This is the way you've communicated.
Yeah.
And you've enjoyed a lot of stuff together and the business together.
Yeah.
Our relationship was very different. We didn't have that kind of communication.
Because you're also multi-generational.
Yeah.
Multi-generational.
Okay. Yeah.
My grandfather.
Yeah.
I worked a lot with my dad, but it was a very different kind of relationship. We didn't sit around and watch movies. We didn't talk about movies and stuff.
We really did sort of, I mean, that was something that we connected to with
It wasn't
together.
for this show that you guys
No, for sure. Yeah.
No,
I
I
mean,
get along.
that's
It's
true.
funny because the first one we did ever was it was just a test of all my setup for the other podcast.
Yeah, the Crew List podcast.
Crew List. And
Yeah.
basically we were just making sure it worked, and I snuck it in, and it was like the 4th one I dropped, and everybody we knew was going, "Oh, you guys are having so much fun together. You should do this." So
we
never
recorded it during COVID too, and I was like staying with you guys, and so we'd already been kind of, hunkered down together watching movies.
Yeah, there wasn't
That's
any work,
really
and
what
so-
we were doing, and so like the conversation kind of came, I think, out of just having already been spending a lot of time together, and but it's true. I mean, it is a gamble because like I don't know if like projecting into the future, I hope to have kids, and it's like I would like my kids to be into the same things as me, but you can't really force that. So it's like it's 50-50 whether
you don't
or not.
know.
You don't know. You could have shown me these movies when I was 12, 13. I could have hated them and just not wanted anything to do with
one
it.
of the Ken Fink, who was a director I've worked with over the years, and actually he was on the Crew List. But I remember when we were doing all that, and Danny and I were watching movies all the time, and he was just sucking up all this material. So I was more than happy to do it. And every Monday, if I happen to be working with Ken or just bump into him, he go, what did you and Danny watch this weekend? And I would tell him, and he go, God, I hope I get to do that.
Because he had just had a son,
He had just had a son.
Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about this before. So sorry if you've heard this, but like the age at which I saw some of the movies we were covering is like probably still on the younger side, but I'm glad I saw them at like 11, 12 years old. Cause
no, it's a real gift.
Yeah,
It's a real gift. And my dad was busy working and working and having kids,
Right.
and we didn't sit down and watch movies. In fact, I got into this business not knowing a lot about movies except the movies that I saw. And the great gift you guys had is that you talked about these things from early on. So I just kind of learned it as I was doing it.
Yeah.
With no special perspective of the history.
Yeah. Your entry point was like, this is a job, it's a vocation, like first.
Right.
Obviously the history's there, but it wasn't like what dragged you into it as a
Right.
career. Yeah.
It was an opportunity.
Right.
And Dad got into it the same way because his dad was able to get him in at Warner Brothers as an apprentice.
Wow.
And then he got drafted into the Army.
Crazy.
And was in World War II for 3-4 years.
That's wild.
And
Did he come back to Warner Brothers?
And he got to come back. Yeah, they saved your job.
How cool.
In fact, there's a big plaque.
I was about to say, I just took the tour like 2 weekends ago randomly.
The big plaque and all. He's right in the middle there.
Oh,
that's
wow, that's so
amazing.
cool.
I took a picture of it. Maybe we can zoom in or something because they had a funny tidbit on the tour though. They said when Jack Warner did that, he put his name at the top, and people were like, "Jack, you didn't serve." And he was like, "Well, I made war bomb
Yeah,
films."
I think he had
He served.
I may be mixing this up with another story, but I think he had like a uniform made because he had made the
I'm
films,
sure
and
he did.
It was
He
really
sounded
proud
like
of himself.
kind of a vain.
He had wardrobe making.
Yeah.
Wardrobe department.
Yeah, make me so I look like a big shot
Hey man, he
military
works
guy.
in show business. It's a
show.
it's an art. Yeah.
Might as well make a show out of it. So actually, we should talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about what your grandfather did and how, because we're multi-generational, and this is you're 3 times, which is impressive.
Yeah, he got in at Vitagraph Studios in Brooklyn, I think it is. Okay. And he was a kid. His mom didn't want him to get into the business. Respectable people didn't do that.
I just like
And so he climbed over the wall and he got a job. Wow. And he started at the bottom as a laborer and worked his way up, did everything, props and stuff, and wound up at the end of his career in New York. He was head of casting for
so he
for
did.
Paramount.
He wore a lot of hats.
Wow, he did. And then when the Depression hit, the Paramount split East and West, and the East went, and that's where his stocks wound up being. Paramount East, and he lost everything. And so he loved New York, and he was a New York guy. And he tried to make it go, and he was out of work. So he finally came out west. And somebody he had given a break to was head of production for Warner Brothers, and I don't remember the guy's name. And my grandfather had 6 kids.
Wow.
Big family.
Yeah.
Came out here with
Moved the whole family out.
Moved the whole family out, piled everybody in one car that he was able to buy, a used car. And got a job. The guy offered him a job in the labor gang.
Also,
back lot.
Wow.
So he started from the bottom again, and he wound up being an AD for all the Michael Curtiz films.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because he had a lot of experience and he knew production and stuff.
Yeah.
And, Charge of the Light Brigade, Yankee Doodle Dandy, that stuff.
That's crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. So he was a stubborn old guy. And after the war, he wanted the raise that everybody else was getting who had foregone a raise during the war. Say, we're at war, we can't take, nobody gets a raise.
Right. Yeah.
So they waited and everybody got their bonus at the end of the war. And they said, no, you were above scale the whole time. So no, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get it. And he quit.
Wow.
And he was like 59, 60.
Damn.
And he quit. And
probably not the...
and he tried to start over again, and it didn't work out so well, and he passed away a couple of years later.
Oh, wow.
So just as my dad was getting in the business. And so Dad came out back from the war and got in back at Warner Brothers, but the lady that was running the department didn't like him. She had her favorites. So he went into...
it can be cliquish.
Yeah.
It's the studio system.
So he went into independence, and he started working in television.
Amazing.
He did some sound effects and music in different, low-budget movies. And he worked his way up in post-production, first in sound effects and music, and then picture, which you could do back then.
Yeah.
Most guys...
Yeah, now it's so compartmentalized.
Right.
Yeah, you're a music editor, you're a sound effects editor, you're a picture
Stay in
editor.
your lane, and
Right.
that's it. Yeah. Yeah.
And he got a job on Burns and Allen. Remember?
Yeah, oh, yeah.
Burns and Allen.
Yeah,
show?
you,
Hey,
Danny,
George
would
Burns.
remember
You know
that.
who George
Yeah,
Burns
yeah,
is?
yeah. I know
Okay,
George.
well, they had a show called
Yeah.
Burns and Allen. They were a comedy act from
Gracie, right?
vaudeville.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wow.
Right, Gracie Allen.
And that was their show. Yeah.
And that was their show. And
Yeah.
they had this kind of offbeat comedy where Gracie was kind of, what would you say? She was kind of...
She was, and apparently very smart, but she
Very
was a little bit sweetly ditzy.
Okay.
Yeah, ditzy, and he's playing with the audience, and,
Right.
and she's saying all these crazy things.
Gotcha.
And it was their act,
Yeah.
Burns and Allen. You could look them up on on the internet
For sure.
and,
Yeah.
check them out. They're pretty funny people. And so they did a show, early sitcom.
Yeah.
While they were doing Lucy, he was doing. My uncle worked on the Lucy show.
I know this. John's
Wow.
your
So
lineage
it's-
has
Yeah.
multiple
Yeah.
lines of, okay. Yeah.
And so Dad got a job on Burns and Allen, and he moved up to editing on Burns and Allen.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of his first jobs was sound effects on Burns and Allen. And the big job,
which would be just probably a lot of
I was
goofy
gonna say,
sound effects.
I'd imagine for
well,
something like that.
it was the laughs.
Oh, wow.
Gosh, that's right.
Like the
So,
canned laugh.
You
Yeah.
had right.
Yeah.
Now nowadays,
Did they have an audience, or was it all canned laughs?
what they did was they cut the show, and then they would screen it for an audience, and they would kind of use that as a guide track.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but the biggest challenge for the editor was to time it so the laughs were appropriate. So they'd be screening it, and all of a sudden, George would bring them in the next day and said, look, I'm standing there
With egg on my face.
stupid. You needed to cut that shorter.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
They could help massage the tempo of his jokes
Yeah,
and how they
and then
land.
they recut it later. And
Yeah.
They used the laugh track from the live audience screening the show
Gotcha.
to cut in the laughs.
So
And
they were
would
legit.
actually use sound effects,
That
laughs
sound. Yeah.
recorded in from
Right.
audiences.
Yeah.
There was a guy later on that did the Lucy show and all those shows, and I think his name was John Pratt, and he had a box,
Yeah.
and he'd come on the dubbing
So it
stage.
was always playing. You just turn it up.
He'd come on the dubbing stage and to smooth out the laughs, or add laughs or sweeten it or whatever he wanted to do, and they'd say, "Well, we need this," and he would like have these keyboard and these buttons, and he would do this, and how's this? And they'd play it, and he'd go, "Oh yeah, that's great."
That's
and
crazy.
He would just sit on the dubbing stage all day while they were mixing these sitcoms, and you had to have a laugh man on the
A laugh man.
Specifically
laugh
what
man.
he handled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Job.
exactly what he
Laugh
did.
man.
Yeah,
Occupation. It's like the George Carlin bit. Occupation? Fool.
yeah. So Dad, that was one of his first jobs, and then he moved up to picture editing on that show, and it was a hybrid show. Because they couldn't do it in front of a live audience because of Gracie's dialogue was so complicated and convoluted.
Yeah.
She couldn't remember a whole episode
Right.
for a live audience.
Oh, wow.
So they shot it 2 camera,
Okay.
and then they'd move the cameras around a little bit. It was a little awkward.
Yeah.
I've seen, if you watch the old ones, it's a little funky.
They were still figuring all that out.
Right.
I mean, the
Yeah.
Lucy show apparently was really was set the template for what still is
Became
like the 3 or 4 camera show.
Desi Arnaz designed that whole system.
That's what became the standard for
Became the
everything.
standard. The
Yeah.
crab dollies moving back and forth
Crazy.
with cameras, and and there's a guy in the booth who's the camera coordinator.
Yeah.
And he's calling
it
shots.
live. Yeah.
So it's sort of a hybrid of what the old live TV days were like,
Right.
where my dad came out of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which also grew out of radio, right? Radio plays and the idea of like
Right. And
having
Burns and
everybody-
Allen was a radio show.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing my dad ever directed had been a radio show. It was called One Man's Family, and it was like a soap opera.
I remember hearing about it. Never heard
Yeah,
of it.
and he, the guy that created the show, when they got the deal to make a TV series out of it, was going to direct it. This is I don't know if I ever told this story. You've heard it, but
It
you may not
definitely
have heard
bears
it.
repeating.
Yeah, so my dad had been struggling trying to be an actor and decided he wanted to get work behind the camera, and met a guy at NBC, and he kept leaving a card in his convertible every day because he was trying to get a job. And the guy finally called him up and went, "Look, I can give you a job if you'll stop leaving shit in my car." So he gave me a job rewinding film in the basement of NBC. After the movie would play, he would rewind it. After it would be on a kinescope. Worked his way up to being a stage manager. And then on this show, he was going to be essentially a stage manager where you're sitting right by the director and you're cueing all the cameras to get them ready for the next shot.
Technical director.
Technical director.
Right. Yeah.
So they get ready to do the very first episode. The red light goes on and the guy froze, like literally just froze. And there was like a long moment, and my dad started calling the shots. And they get through the whole episode, and the guy went, "Okay, you're the director. I can't do that."
That's crazy.
I mean, that was it.
He choked.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a lot of pressure.
And nowadays, like something like that, it would just not happen.
Right.
But it was
Well,
so nascent back then still. The whole
Totally. It's funny because, I mean, having just taken this Warner studio tour, it's actually quite timely because of your family lineage and the Warner Brothers connection, because they bring you on. It's funny for reference, like the studio tour there is not anything
not
like
like
Universal.
No.
It's very kind of I mean, I enjoyed
kinda homey.
It is, yeah. It's much more like they take you around to a couple, pre-picked points. You get off on foot, but there's not really much in the way of like a spectacle or anything like that. But they show you live TV setup. I think it's like the Jennifer Hudson show or something. Okay, and they have it set up with the 3-camera crab dolly thing, but they're like, we don't shoot it live. We just set it up like this, and then everything's massaged. Like there's no intention to actually keep it live, but it's like that
The
setup and
impression
that
that it's
approach
live.
is so...
It's just the way the format.
Yeah,
Because
totally.
I think everybody's comfortable with that.
Exactly, yeah. Anyway, I find it interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It was, I mean, like John was saying, Desi literally invented that. And
Right.
it's still, other than the 4th camera. I don't know if they were doing 4. They were doing 3 cameras, weren't they, back then?
Yeah.
And what was the name of that movie, Ola? You told me that. The
Monster.
The Monster?
The 3-headed monster.
The 3-headed monster?
That's the first thing I ever cut.
Really?
Yeah, I was an assistant editor for the Bob Newhart show.
Oh, yeah.
So the editor was a guy named Pam Blumenthal, and it was a man.
Yeah.
His first name was Max, and Max Pam Blumenthal, but he always went by Pam.
Okay.
And he was about this tall, and about that wide.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And
I love this guy already.
Yeah. It sounds like a riot.
and just cranky.
Yeah.
Just cranky all the time, cranky
Yeah.
and just kind of angry at everything.
Yeah.
But he liked me. I was his assistant. It was the last season. And I just moved up from apprentice. And those days, I had to sit next to him a lot of the time
Yeah.
just to shag trims.
Wow.
Because, you had all those trim boxes, and they would, on a 3-camera show, they would, shoot rolls of film.
Yeah.
And, your trim rolls were this big, and you had to,
Yeah. It's a lot.
so-
The volume of material.
volume of film.
Yeah.
Little funny thing. My first day, I'll back up a little bit. Pam, he'd come in late.
Yeah.
He'd read the paper. He'd do a little work, and he'd come up with some excuse. He'd break the film or something, and then he'd go, "Let's go to lunch." So we go to lunch. We go to Musso's or something.
Oh, I love it.
I topped up my credit card within months of. I said, "Pam, I can't do this anymore."
Every day?
Yeah,
I'm
of course,
great.
Pam's not buying you lunch.
No, he's
That's the
not
old
buying me
story,
lunch.
right?
Yeah.
He's not
As an
buying me lunch.
assistant, you better have cash.
I said, I can't do it. But anyway, so, and then after lunch,
Yeah.
we would take a nap.
I love this guy.
And somehow that show managed to get on the air.
Yeah. And he didn't have a regular stool or simple,
Yeah.
because most editors had very uncomfortable chairs.
Right.
Yeah, that I can attest to.
Yeah.
But Pam had like big office chair, but he had it raised up. he had it raised up to the height of a moviola, so he could.
I love it.
So.
Like an office armchair?
Yeah, armchair.
Like a comfortable...
Yeah, a big comfortable chair.
Yeah.
And it leaned back. Okay. And he would put his feet up after lunch.
Yeah.
And he'd take a nap.
Right there.
Right there. He had this really... Now, there's more backstory to it. When he was born, he had a problem that his eyelids wouldn't stay open. So he had surgery as a baby. So to keep his eyelids open while he was awake... and he blinked like that. He didn't just like blink.
You had to work at it, right?
He had to work at it. So it's the first day because I'd been out and it was after lunch and he'd gone and he fell asleep in it at the moviola with his feet up on top of the moviola. And what I didn't know was when he slept, his eyes opened up. and I walk in, and he's staring straight at the ceiling. He's asleep, and I thought my first day I killed my editor. and I go, and I, are you okay? And he woke up, and then I figured it out.
Like, oh, all right.
But works for him in case anybody walks by. It's like.
I was going to say, that's a good cover.
He's getting a really good idea.
Really thinking about a decision, an edit he needs to make.
Exactly. So
wow.
The monster.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
So the editor would get back to the monster. They jerry rigged this 3 moviola heads, picture heads, together in one machine and one sound head, and they would all run in sync. And so
all 3 cameras, right? It's like you got all 3 cameras.
Yeah. And so the assistant would, after he sunk up the dailies or synced up, I guess.
Yeah, I never know what the...
It's
Is it synced?
It's
the old guys, that's the old guy said sunk. And
I think I learned sunk.
Yeah.
Okay. I always heard synced, so maybe this is...
exactly.
That's generational.
So you put all the reels up, the 3 picture and 1 sound.
Right.
And then the editor would run it and he'd sit back like this and he'd mark the camera he wanted to be on. And then you didn't do the in and the out. You only did the ins. So you'd mark this one, you start here, and then you go over the C camera and the B and the A. And so the editor would mark all the different, for the whole scene. And then the assistant...
You cut it together.
Would call roughing it out. And you go through, put them all in the synchronizer, and then you switch back and forth.
Wow.
I should grab my synchronizer and just put it there.
Yeah.
Oh,
exactly.
Oh, yeah, it's right over there. Wow. Yeah. This is a synchronizer?
It is. It's a synchronizer, right. So A, B, C, and then the soundtrack.
That's wild.
And this...
Yeah.
It's heavy, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me feel it.
I have one of these.
Crazy. Yeah, I mean, I was at Film Tools in Burbank picking up like a hard drive for something recently, and I like peeked in the back, and they have like a bunch of...
Do they still have old gear?
Well, yeah, and it got me thinking too, because it's like a lot of that stuff is so like, what happens to these parts?
That's why I got
like,
that on eBay, and I thought, these are just going to be gone.
Right.
Yeah, my brother was working at Universal when they finally gave up film.
Yeah.
They finally went fully electric, and they had, warehouses of
stuff.
Yeah.
Moviolas and stuff.
Yeah.
He bought a bunch of stuff.
Right.
Synchronizers. I think he might have gotten a moviola.
If I had room, I would have found a place to put a movie.
I mean, but this is the funny thing too is that like this is also like really specialized, expensive equipment that in the course of decades,
that's a pretty
technology
precise
shifts
instrument.
Becomes. Yeah, it's like you get. Well, how much did you pay for this on eBay? Like $100 or something?
Yeah, not even.
Crazy. Yeah.
And then there was, the good ones were made by Moviola.
Right.
And
so
then
they all played nice.
Hollywood Film would made a different, cheaper cut knockoff. And nobody wanted to work with the Hollywood Film synchronizers.
And what was the hot splicer too? The Revis. That was the good one, right?
You'd like see the Hollywood Film brand name and be like, oh God,
I got to work on this.
Yeah, the bad gear equipment was like that was the first thing you'd want to get your pick of all the good. Like
sure.
Because they'd have a room full of stuff. If you go get a job at a studio, and you'd be able to go grab some, trying to get a really good sound head. And
it makes a difference too when it is analog, like machinery that like does wear and tear. Like it needs to be at a certain level. Does it say MGM on the corner?
Yeah.
Also? Oh,
that's probably where
crazy.
it was.
That's so cool. But I'm curious. So back to the multicam monster moviola setup. Like the editor, Pam, would just sort of
He would mark which camera he wanted to be on.
Yeah.
Usually, it's really basic.
Yeah.
You're in the B camera.
Sure.
As the scene gets set up.
Right.
Somebody walks in the door or whatever.
Yeah.
And then as soon as you're getting in for the joke, you got to be in the close.
Yeah.
So
it followed a formula, sort of.
Very formula.
Yeah.
And and like I said, and then Pam would mark it, and I would assemble it.
Yeah.
Rough it out. We called it roughing it out.
You're editing it, basically.
Well, Pam was making the decisions.
Yeah, he was making the decisions.
Yeah.
And they would always shoot pickups and stuff.
Right.
And so you'd give it to the editor, and he would go through it, tighten it up. A lot of tightening. Mm-hmm. And the beauty of a live audience is you have the timing of the audience, which always is nice.
Yes.
Cut to the reactions and stuff like that.
Totally.
And so I did that with, I was the assistant, and ordering opticals. It was all very simple.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit because Danny was curious about how to do all that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe that's a tangent worth going on because it's something that fascinates me, that it's the simple click of a button now. And I don't take it for granted because, again, so much of me growing up was hearing via you how this stuff changed. And I kind of got to see, I mean, I was still young, but I mean, it was that shift.
I can't remember if you ever came to a cutting room of mine when it was film. I don't think you were old enough.
I don't think so because you started on the Avid.
When you were born, I was working on the montage. I went back and did a TV movie that summer on film. That was the last film job I had.
Is that the George Lucas one, or is that Edit Droid?
No, that one was Edit Droid.
Okay,
Lucas.
so there were a couple
there were a bunch
precursors before
until Avid
Avid, because it was all trying to replicate the way editors cut, and it was not.
There was video,
very
which
awkward.
was weird.
Yeah.
There were disc systems and stuff like that.
Yeah, and it was like clunkier than just still working on film until they got it figured out.
I mean, the montage was the first one I ever worked. Did you ever work on that one?
I think so.
Because it would digitize, like if you'd go in to make a splice, it would take a sec, but it would digitize like 30 frames on either end of the cut so that you could roll it. Right. You'd have to wait for that to happen. But basically it was about, 50 VHS decks. And that was where all the brain power went, was telling the decks where to go via timecode to be able to show you the cuts.
That's insane. Right. So there's just a room.
There was a separate room.
A bank of VHS or beta machines, depending on your system. And so you could have the flexibility, because cutting on tape before that you cut onto a videotape, your source onto your record, and you butt them up. Well, someone says, I need to make changes. I want to loosen that or tighten that. You can't.
Yeah.
You got to go back. You got to lay it down again.
Yes. Right.
You got to make all your changes.
Yeah.
And so what they needed was a system where you could play it, change it, play it, and change it.
Gotcha.
Until it
took a little while.
It took a while. And so you had to have multiple copies of the same material chasing each other so they could play and switch.
Right.
Yeah, it was a big
replicate your
switcher.
That's
computer-controlled switcher.
Yeah. That must have been so loud, all those VHS.
Well, they were in another room. They were literally down the hall, and it was hot in there, too.
Yeah.
Right. I think it was like 25. I forget how many decks there were.
Right. And if you had a short cut,
it
couldn't handle it.
Like something that was like really within.
It would throw off the machine. So then they had buffers that would lay off your shortcuts.
Yeah.
So, and then that would come in and play it. It was really stupid.
They were actually probably more complicated than what Abbott ended up figuring out.
Sure, yeah.
Because it needed so much brain power to do that, based on the time codes.
Once you had digital, it wasn't an issue.
Right. Yeah, once everything was
ones and zeros.
You're not changing it.
Yeah.
And they all discovered how complicated editing was.
Yes, yeah.
To be able to work the way
I told you that story.
Yeah.
I was working on LA Law the first time I did the Lucas one, which was the Editroid, and that was laser discs. So we had 2 discs for each scene, which that was supposed to be more than enough. And so in LA Law, it was probably before your time, you never saw it, but it was like really tight. The dialogue, that was sort of, Botchko's thing. It was like everybody's interrupting each other. So everything was butted together. We were pulling air out off camera anytime anyone was talking. Mm-hmm. So I was cutting the first episode with this, and it kept stopping and would have to buffer. and it was becoming like it was creating issues time wise. And so that year we had a person who was assigned from Editroid just to our show. And I called her and I went, hey, why does this keep buffering every time I'm trying to play a sequence of any kind of length? And she looked at my timeline and went, oh, you know what? These audio cuts are too short. It can't do that. And I went, well, that isn't going to change.
Yeah.
So they ended up adding a third laser disc, and they had to eat it. And they were like $150 a disc. And for the whole season, they paid the difference because they said it would work.
Yeah.
And it didn't. So they had to,
That's crazy.
Have an extra disc
That's
made
funny,
for every.
to look at the timeline and be like, well, if you change that, it'll work.
Yeah, you can't. You just can't do that.
You just can't
It's
do
like,
that.
well, that's not good.
No, I need it to work for me, not the other way around.
Yeah, you can do it on film. It took
Yeah.
a long time, but
And that timing on L.A. Law and other shows really came out of the sitcom timing.
it did.
It did
Yeah.
because
It's like mod dialogue.
if
Yeah.
you really sit down and watch a Bob Newhart show,
Yeah.
it's really tight.
Yeah.
And there are stock shots that are a half a second long.
Right.
Quick zoom up to the building. And
Not
stuff.
like that. I always taught Danny the old establishing
I love that.
shot.
I love
Establishing
that.
shot,
That
yeah.
you would run the film from
Yeah.
the nose out to
A sitcom
Yeah.
establishing shot is 2 seconds.
Okay.
A drama is 3.
3.
A movie of the week is 4.
So that may help, but
Yeah.
Dan's got to
That's-
stretch a project he's
do
working
things.
on. So
Yeah.
yeah, you're right though. I think that's a good point that the sitcom pacing for dialogue became. It was weird. It's like they're almost like radio shows.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's all. In fact, my dad early on he showed me a trick where the visual was always important for him, and they were butting the words together, and so he would you don't want to cut to somebody right at the beginning of the word.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So he taught me this technique where you'd butt the words up together, and then you'd roll the cut back. So the incoming cut is at least 3 or 4 frames before the sound. So you get the beginning, the face change on for the word.
Yes.
And you can still, so you aren't cutting right and someone's mouth is open and stuff
Yes.
like that.
Yeah.
And you could still, because he always wanted to make it look good and look smooth.
Yeah.
That's the trick with stuff like that because we had the same issue. I remember because LA Law ended up being talking heads. It wasn't a filmmaker's show.
No.
But you wanted to
Yeah.
not feel clunky and
Right.
jerky. So it's a
Yes.
real trick, like feathering around that and making sure that the picture cuts aren't too short.
That is
where
interesting.
everybody's just going
Yeah.
like this.
Yeah.
Exactly.
The brain needs to register
But the
tempo.
other rule was
Yeah.
that you don't want to have lines off camera if
Right.
they have to do anything to do with the setup or the punchline.
For comedy and
For
yeah.
comedy, you can't
Yeah.
because you got to see and hear everything
Yeah.
that is important for the joke.
Yeah.
Because it's all about the joke.
Of course. Yeah.
Which is kind of like life.
Yeah.
It's all about the joke. It's all about the laugh.
It
you
is.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. That's true. But it's funny. I mean, that is a good point you made. And this is the kind of stuff. I mean, I, on our first podcast, said that I think I bring some of the, like, I'm always like looking further afield and trying to kind of reach for like sort of like the deeper meaning of things are and the history and the trajectory and like stuff like that fascinates me because so much of that tempo, it's still there. You know what I mean? Like the 3 camera setup and then the way the jokes are structured, the way the editing works, like that seeps into a lot of other forms
does.
and genres.
'Cause it
And
works.
It's like, exactly.
It's a writer's medium.
There you go. Yeah. Which is what they say about TV, right? I mean,
Well,
that
it's,
is the-
comedy
yeah,
TV in
specifically
particular.
comedy. Yeah. Yeah.
There was a guy named Earl Pomerantz who came out of MTM. He was one of their writers, and I did a show for him, Major Dad. And I've been cutting for years, and my dad was the associate producer. He finally quit editing. He was on Simon and Simon for the last 5 years or so.
Yeah.
And he was the associate producer on the pilot for Major Dad.
Wow.
And he didn't trust anybody, so he said he wanted me to cut it.
It's fun. You got to work together though.
And we got to work together.
That is cool.
It was cool. We set a record. From shooting to delivery was less than a week,
Wow.
and it had to be done. And Augie Hess was my assistant,
Okay.
and we cut it on this thing called CMX 6000.
Oh, I remember seeing a demo of that. That was one of the first.
That was an-
yeah, it was a good multi-camera.
Yeah.
because you just push the button, it switched the cameras and hit this, and it had a wheel and it had a timeline that kind of went up.
Yeah.
It was a very simple,
It's all
basic
time
timeline.
code though. They were hard to read.
There was
those
time code.
Yeah.
There was very
Yeah.
little description. Anyway, so they shot it on a Thursday, and they shot it twice.
Wow.
And I had to run a first cut on Sunday.
Oh, wow.
Sunday morning.
That's crazy. What was the why was the turnaround so expedited?
They had to deliver
okay.
it. They had to deliver it to the network the next Thursday.
Jeez.
Yeah, I fell asleep in color correction.
Yeah, you'd been burning the
3
candle.
o'clock in the morning
on
on Thursday.
Oh, you and I have that beat though, man. Dan knows this story. When my last assisting job was with you and Jonathan on Deadline.
Deadline Madrid.
And by then I knew I was going to be cutting the next year too. So you guys were great. As soon as I was done, you were throwing scenes at me to cut. But we did 2 full days. You remember that?
Yeah.
A lot of Jolt Cola and cigarettes. And
Yeah, a lot of that.
Just didn't go to sleep.
Didn't go. We couldn't. It was the same thing. It was a backdoor pilot.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. It was a movie.
So,
that
but
makes
that's
that go
crazy. Thursday to.
Oh yeah. And so I managed to get it cut, and we've got everybody in a cutting room. It's literally half the size of this room.
Yeah.
And so I had little bleachers behind me, and the director and all the producers and everybody was there. And so Augie's sitting next to me, and we're running it, and they're giving notes. And I stop at one point, and I look at the timeline, and it disappears.
Oh, no.
The whole thing, it's going boop, 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 boop. Everything goes away.
Oh, you're watching it go away.
I'm watching it go
God.
away. They don't know what's going on. They're all yakking. So I look over at Augie, because he's a techno guy. He's really good at all that stuff. And he says, I think it's time for a coffee break. So they all piled out.
Yeah.
And I went to the bathroom or something, and I came, and Augie said, I found it. He found the show. Somehow,
Oh, it was lost.
but it was like 3 days work.
Oh, no shit.
And
You have that moment where you're like,
Oh,
your
yeah.
heart sinks. You're like, oh my God, what's going on?
that was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so
God,
anyway,
that's the
so
worst.
we finished, we got it together and we cut it. And the composer wrote cues,
Wow.
and I cut them in.
Oh, so thank God.
Yeah.
I mean,
and stuff
Pre-wrote
like that.
cues.
Pre-wrote
for it.
cues.
That's crazy.
Without
It's a
seeing the show.
sitcom. It's
Yeah,
not,
right,
it's a little
exactly, yeah.
standard thing, a little transition
sure,
thing. He was a
yeah.
real nice guy, and he was very cooperative.
Yeah.
And so it all worked out, and it was.
It is crazy.
Kinda crazy.
Yeah. I had a
Crazy
similar
things.
thing happen the first Avid show I did. It was this, I don't know, 3rd season, I guess I'd been on LA Law. And we were really the guinea pigs for 24 frame software for Avid. They didn't even have it when they were teaching us how to use the machine.
That's true.
I kept going, are you sure this is going to be ready? Like, oh yeah, it'll be ready. Because I said, they're not going to like this. It
I
was
didn't realize they
30
were like
frame.
laying the railroad track as the train was moving for some
Oh yeah.
reason.
Well,
I mean,
everybody was angling to get in
Yeah.
to that market.
well,
but-
I assume. Sorry.
Well, I was just
go
going to
ahead.
say
Yeah.
in relation
Yes,
to John's
yeah.
story. So I'm assembling. We've cut all the scenes and we're putting the show together. My assistant, Mike Sale at the time, who's gone on to be an editor. So we're sitting there. We get to the last act and it's like the last scene, and I load it up and I cut it in, and there's no scene. It's one frame. And I went, oh, shit, what happened? And we don't, we're scrambling. I have to screen in like a half an hour. So I recut the scene as fast as I could, and we put it in, screen the movie. And we come back afterwards, and I open up the thing, and I had trimmed off like 2 frames at the end when I cut it the first time, and I left the in and out markers there.
Oh my God.
And so that's all that went in.
it was just that.
Thank God it didn't happen to the other parts of the show. If I must have cleared everything, but I would have been going crazy trying to figure out.
Yeah.
It was just gone. I cut this.
Yeah.
I know I did.
Yeah.
I knew I did. I
That's
remember.
insane. I think they had to stress test it with, you guys were the guinea pigs, like you said, which is interesting because it's like all these different systems were kind of vying for.
It was a gamble,
Yeah.
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 And everyone was a little nervous.
Dominance.
Because film worked.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, doing film shows, cutting them on videotape and stuff like that. And Augie and I did a couple of shows.
So probably still cutting film, though, because most of those shows, they would still take the EDL off of the electric, because that was part of the data that was on the key numbers.
Right.
We were shooting on like 35 3-perf, because they wanted to save the money.
One perf a frame.
Yeah.
It adds up.
But it was funny. Augie was really good at this, and we were coming up with different terms for things.
Yeah.
So there was, we had to get the film and the video and the sound, because the video and the sound was still separate,
Right.
and put it all together. And we came up with this suitcase to put all the sound and video cassettes and everything, and that would go to the facility, and the film would go to the lab, and everything would go. And so, at the time, we were, what do we call this suitcase?
Yeah.
Well, there's something that the president has called the football.
The football. Yeah.
The football, and he carries the nuclear codes.
The launch codes. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we named it the football because it was so important.
Yeah.
It is important.
That this is something that goes from
like
the
the
set to
negative.
the left. Right.
Yeah.
And I understand to this day they still call it the football.
Do they really? I love that.
There you go. We heard it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
That's where it originated.
Yeah.
I feel like that does stick around. I definitely feel like nowadays, I mean, obviously the crucial component, those choke points, become less scary because a lot of the media it's redundant now. But it's like, it is funny to me that there's still, even in today's world,
Well, yeah.
where
How many
everything's backed
codecs
up.
are there, though? I mean, that's the thing. That's like,
Yeah.
that's still something that I think could be streamlined.
Yeah. But even more on the level of like just, the delivering the cards to the post house when a show wraps, and like there's still points at which
Things can
media is
happen.
very much physical. I mean, I know there's like they're doing cloud stuff now where you can be on set and it immediately is like proxies, but I feel like that's still wobbly and it's a way off.
Yeah.
But it's it's
did- We did a news show called WIOU. Okay. And so there's probably 30 monitors on
Wow.
the set with different content
yeah.
all over the place.
Which somebody has to make.
We had to make it, but somebody had to play it back.
Right.
Oh God.
And we have a guy in a box that's smaller than this room, lined with 3/4 inch machines,
To feed all of the
and he
the
has to
monitors.
put everything in and cue it up. And they say, okay, roll him action, and he presses the button and everything starts going. So, but if somebody yells cut or let's go back to the top,
It's not going to.
Yeah.
he's got to go, wait, I got to get it. And he's got to re-cue everything up. And
Yeah.
now I guess it's all digital.
Right.
They just, and then
Yeah.
it's a button.
Yeah.
But it's funny. I remember going through certain scripts that you're getting ready to shoot or whatever, and it would describe, like the writer's version would be a room that's filled with monitors, and got your assistant's behind you going, because you've got to make all the things that go in there if you can,
Right.
Or now you can compliment
Just
it's
chroma
way
key
better
stuff
than it used to
in.
be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That was an optical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had to burn it in.
Oh right. We were watching.
If you saved it for post,
Yeah.
Yes.
On film,
you
is a
just put it
big
in
deal.
green screens,
That's-
and then it's an optical.
There was an episode of what were we watching? Columbo, where he's like sitting in a bar. It's
yeah.
the one Jack directed. It's the one with the guy from Green Acres, whose name.
Oh yeah, yeah, Eddie
Eddie
Albert.
Eddie Albert. Yeah, so Eddie Albert's the the
the
heavy
villain.
in it, and Columbo's like watching TV in a bar, but it's very clearly like
Burned in.
And we were talking a little bit about how
Well, and also the
That would have
shot that
to-
they used
Yeah.
for the plate was a freeze frame.
Yeah.
yeah,
We're going,
But-
what? This looks so bad.
Yeah.
It's like 'cause there's no grain isn't moving.
No,
Yeah.
and it's a film insert
It's
on the television.
Yeah, the television.
Yes.
There's no scan lines.
yeah, right. All the
Everything,
the
it's just
CRT
film.
lines. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
Then we came up with scan lines, and you put in scan lines when you do your burn in.
to make it
Just to
look
make
like
it
Make the
at
film
least look
shot
in context. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that would have to. The other thing that's, I mean, again, this is just like basic workflow stuff for you guys, but I geek out on it because it's just a whole other way of thinking about editing and delivery and post. But like, reel, was separated into sound and effects, and all that had to match timing wise. Like when you were still in the analog days, like we were
Yeah.
talking about.
Yeah,
like
Phil-
if you had like
Phil
one
leader.
gunshot or something.
you
that
still
would
had
have
to build
still
a
be-
900-foot roll
Yeah.
with a bunch of leader.
Yeah.
And I was telling Dad, or Phil leader, telling Dad a lot of the Phil leader, at least when I first started, was old porn movies.
Porn
So
movies.
John can attest. I wasn't
just-
making that up.
Just like what leftover.
Yeah,
Like-
they need
Because
they
they
need
would
prints.
Yeah.
prints and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And they would be release prints because you didn't want splices in them. If
Right,
you could
yeah.
help, you want as few splices as possible.
Yeah.
So they
you
would
could
get
run
release
smooth.
prints and
Yeah.
stuff. In
Yeah.
fact, my very
And you flip
first
it over too, because the emulsion can get
Yeah,
gunk,
you had
can
to be
gunk
on
up
the
the sound head. So you
Gotcha.
had to.
cell side, so you
Gotcha.
flip it over. My very first job as an paid apprentice in the business was reclaiming fill leader.
Whoa.
So from shows that they were done.
The dubbing units, they bring in the dubbing units, and I would roll through it. If there's a sound effect, I'd take it out and splice it back together and keep rolling. And it was a room this size, and from floor to ceiling filled with boxes of dubbing units.
Wow.
And that was going to be my job. And
just pulling out all the, and did they save all the, I bet they do, right? Did they save the effects or?
No.
Yeah.
No. But somebody came in and said, do you know how to sync dailies? And I said, yes. Sure. I never went back to that room. I never went back to that
You're
job.
like, yes, please get me out of here.
Oh, yeah.
And they gave me the film, and I put it in the room, and I go, oh, how do I do this? That was my first apprentice job, and I got out of there. I never went back to.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nothing like learning on the job, though. I've definitely done that before of like saying I can do something that I haven't tried. Yeah, sure. I'll cut
no,
on this
fortunately, I knew the concept.
Yes,
I knew the
for
bit.
sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
just from being around, I would go to the cutting room with my dad.
Yeah, exactly. You have the multi-generational.
I was the
your blood.
one that went to work with Dad in the summer and on the weekends because he worked Saturdays, and I was the only one that showed at that point any interest in the business. So I would go in and hang around the cutting room and watch him cut, or walk around Goldwyn Studios. I remember he was cutting The Fugitive.
Wow. That's the one, I think, where I had my first job, the one by the Formosa, right?
Yeah.
It was Warner Hollywood or Goldwyn. I can't remember what it was called when I started.
It was probably Warner Hollywood.
Their mixing stage, my first job there was 1980. And that at the time, that was like state of the art for sound. That's where Star Wars mixed.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And when I was there, they were mixing the Return of the Jedi.
No way.
So
never told me that.
Right? 1980, I think.
Yeah, that was.
Yeah, and we had all the same guys on our movie that did the movie I was working on. Same mixing team.
Yeah.
So
R2D2 was a dubbing unit.
Yeah, wait, I have heard this recently.
Yeah. We read it somewhere.
Reel to
dialogue
to.
Yeah.
And George had.
Did you tell me that story that
yeah.
somebody he heard one of the sound guys say, "Just what should I slate this?" And it was the mixer going R2D2. Maybe Forrest was telling us, and Lucas went, "What is that? What did you just say?" And he goes, "Oh, it's just
Reel to."
He goes, "No, but what did you?" And he asked him to say, "What was it you said?" And he goes, "R2D2." And he went,
I like that.
He does have a thing for alphanumeric, doesn't he? With like THX and R2D2
stuff.
Crazy.
Yeah, just for the younger people. For the younger people, like the way those rooms would work, and we went into them as assistants and editors to deliver stuff.
Yeah.
But if you imagine like a mixing board, all the faders, there had to be a machine for each one of those things. It was running 24 frame sound mag stripe, and so those had to be loaded. And they all had to be sunk up so that when they started rolling, they would lock them all together.
Yes.
Everything stayed in sync.
Yeah.
Right.
So you'd have to hang. What was that? Was the term? Like I got to hang a unit.
Yeah. And when you're like, because I know this still sticks with like mix and post audio stuff. Like when you're printing it, that's literally what you're doing when you're running everything again.
Yeah,
like
recording. So you're re-recording.
You're re-recording.
Yeah.
Although originally when they were recording onto optical, before there was mag, they were recording onto optical, and when they would rehearse.
Yeah.
All the units, the music mixer, it
was like live
sound effects, and they would rehearse and make their notes, and then what they would go for the take, and they would play back and mix all in one take until the end of the reel.
Wow!
Because it was literally being photographed onto an optical soundtrack that was going to be developed. And that was your sound master.
So a lot of movies, not anymore, but they used to have on the edge there was an optical track, and that's where the sound came
from. Little waveform line,
which seems oddly more sophisticated than mag stripe, weirdly to me. But
when my dad first cut dailies, it was with an optical track.
So the reader on a moviola head would have to have a light.
Well, they all have that kind of round thing on top of the sound head. That was an optical reader.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was
sound was paired with.
No, it was a separate track.
It was still a double system,
but it was an optical track. So when the assistant got the dailies in the morning, he would get the picture and the sound from the lab.
Wow.
And
sound from the lab.
Sound from the lab. Yeah, because it was literally
developing the sound.
And was kind of cool though is that you could actually see that clapper.
You could see it.
You could see it explode on the optical track.
Yeah.
So syncing dailies was really
Easier.
fast.
Because it could
much easier.
super visual.
You'd be rolling. Oh, there it is.
Although you probably know this trick too. It's like, because sound comes tails out. So I learned the real quickly what the sound of a slate in reverse is. Like, and so you'd wind backwards and you'd find the clappers. I mean, there's always an audio announce, but that you could get pretty close, pretty fast. I just knew to, there's a little speaker on your desk and you're rolling through them.
It's amazing. Dan, we got it so easy now. It's crazy. I have a lot of respect for this analog stuff, but it is funny because I think from my perspective, there's like, we romanticize it, my generation, or just, I think, younger people in film in general. I love this stuff. I geek out on it. It's funny how a lot of the nostalgia for analog kind of purely sits in like film for film's sake and sort of look and all that. But I think the down the line impact of like how post was so radically different is really fascinating.
It really was
to
different.
Me. That's where, I mean, it's that story. I don't know if he does it anymore. And I always thought it was maybe a little conceited of him, but Spielberg says still analog guy because the time it takes to make a decision.
He liked having the time between, and it does take time.
Speaks to a workflow, and it was a different thing. It's like you had to be a little more deliberate about, am I going to make this choice? Like, how do I want to structure this?
My dad cut with scissors.
Crazy.
And you lose a frame.
Right.
Yeah, it's like the old, when you cut negative, you lose a frame.
Yeah, you lose a frame.
Yeah.
So your first cut, what he would do is he would mark his out.
Yeah.
And you would lose that frame. And then you paper clip the cuts together, picture and sound.
Yeah.
And your assistant.
Yeah, I had to do that a couple times.
And your assistant would have to splice them together.
Wow. Paperclip.
Yep. So you make your in and out choices and you keep going.
You have to know your choice. You have to know if your cut works without having to rehearse it.
Yeah.
You can't see it.
You can't see it. Now, most of them would probably cut a little looser and then go back and trim.
It's better to have a little fat than like be.
Well, that's why splicing tape was like a big deal. It was the first time you could change your mind. I mean, you could always do it, but they'd have to splice in like leader.
Yeah.
I did that as an experiment once. And my
cut a scene with
I cut the
clip?
whole show with paper clips.
Wow.
Well, actually, I used tape. I ran it through the synchronizer.
Did you take your assistant out for a nice meal?
Mel Friedman was my assistant.
Yeah.
And he's a whiner anyway.
Yeah, he was. I could hear him.
No, but he was, but he had to splice the whole show for me. But it was an experiment, and actually it worked out really well.
Yeah.
I made the choices. I thought I was thoughtful on all my choices.
Right.
And
you'd cut now. I mean, you knew, like,
and you know what works. Because I did come up with techniques that I used, and you just kind of have to come up with techniques to get this stuff done.
Yeah.
I mean, the beginning of a word, you don't want to cut at the beginning of the word. You want to back up, and then how far do you back up, and when do you want to cut to the person as their face changes?
Right.
So as their face starts to change, you want to see everything change. So how many frames before that do you actually cut to them? Well, you don't want to cut to them when they're static. So it's just like getting close but not too close and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So you just go, you mark your in. They start to blink, back up 2 frames.
Yeah, blinks are no good. Blinkies.
Yeah, get rid of the blink. Yeah.
But it's funny because both of you guys hit the same point. There's something about when you're cutting on film, you do take a little bit longer to make that choice, but you get, as you do it more and more and you know what's not going to work, you're able to streamline that process. But it made a huge difference for me when I started cutting digitally because my cuts were way closer than a lot of other people's that never cut film because I knew where I was going to make the cut.
Exactly.
And I did a similar digital experiment where I cut a whole episode, never really rewatched anything until I'd gotten the whole show together. Right. Now, I not only did that once just to see, but it's amazing how close you really are.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing.
That show was really pretty good. It was pretty tight.
Yeah.
And I went through it after Mel had spliced it all.
It's a lot of splices.
I can imagine.
And it played because I used the craft.
Yeah.
I used what I had learned and I got more precise.
Right.
I wouldn't do it again, but it was a fun exercise.
Yeah.
It was a fun exercise.
Yeah, it's a useful experiment in terms of like giving yourself a creative constraint, a guardrail to be like, I have to, this is,
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, again, maybe I'm waxing philosophical here, but I do think some of the problem with the tools we have now is there's maybe too many options. There's too much latitude. At least I feel that sometimes if I'm working on my own personal stuff, it's like, it is nice to, I mean, it's across the board, I guess. The quickest example that can come to mind is just with color. Because I mean, now even on your iPhone, you can shoot log and everything's kind of grayscale and you have a lot of latitude and room to change exposure and make it look however you want. But it's like, that's not necessarily a good thing. It's kind of nice to have your choices delineated for you, or at least, I don't know.
Well, and one of the other things
menu is shorter.
One of the bones that I've always picked about a lot of the editing software, especially the one that's sort of what I would call prosumer or consumer.
Yeah, where it
is that
straddles that line.
Well, and they throw all the effects are all forward. Like everything's, you can make a dissolve without even, you don't have to think about it.
Right.
Like everything's a dissolve. And it's like, well, that's not editing.
Yeah, right.
It's just a bunch of bells and whistles.
Yeah.
It's like, you could trick yourself into thinking something looks really cool.
Well, yeah, it's editing for a very particular kind of, avenue outlet, which is like the prosumer world of, social video and ads. And I mean, it's,
and I think each step is a process.
Yeah.
And it can distract you from what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
You're cutting it.
Yeah.
You're-
Yes.
you're-
That's a really good point.
That's
Yeah.
stuff you do later.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's about choices
Yeah.
in storytelling.
Yes.
And so you got to stay on that
Yeah.
until and then you do the next step. You could
Right.
do we do our tightening pass. We
Right.
would do but you would get it together and you'd
Yeah.
make your choices and tell the story.
Yeah.
Best place
That's why
to be.
I've always said music should be the last thing you do because you can really fool yourself with a piece of music.
yeah.
Like, oh, this is really emotional.
I've learned
Is
that
it?
firsthand for sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like better to stay attentive to the material. And I mean, there's that, I've heard this term in doc and unscripted stuff. It's like the radio edit where you're just listen, like just
Make sure the
look at the
information's all
footage,
there.
get it down, get the structure down. And then you can start to kind of, because that's a good point you're making. I mean, I think now all that stuff's collapsed into one thing at the click of a button. I'd be like, oh, let me fuck with the color. I can do this. I can add that. And it's, the invitation is there constantly to run ahead of yourself, but it's it's helpful and it takes some discipline to kind of,
My goal always was to cut it so well there was no place to put music.
I know exactly what you mean, though.
Yes, there
it's
you
like,
go.
Because
You're
you
going to have
stop
to
the
find
show
a
with the
place.
composer,
Right.
At the end, and you're done with the show. And I always liked it when there was like 3 or 4 cues.
Yeah,
And it's like,
yeah.
And maybe you gave him a little montagey thing that he could
Right.
go to
Yeah.
town on.
That's
But-
like a bed for
but
him. Yeah.
It can be so
that
overused.
It's
Yeah.
playing. You don't need music. It's
Yep.
playing so well. And I think as an editor, I think that's the goal.
Yeah.
Is I have a sound mixer friend who calls music bondo. It just moves over all the rough spots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think people get dependent on that.
So
I
don't
know-
have any rough spots.
Right.
You don't need to
And
have
now
the
they're putting
bondo.
music in everything, everywhere, wall to wall.
Yep.
And I'm going, I wonder how this plays without music.
Yep. It's a real good test of the I don't know, quality of an edit, the integrity of it, I think.
And
yeah.
well, because that's where the acting and that storytelling shines.
Yeah.
Is without the music.
Right.
And then the music is there to add to it. It
Yes.
shouldn't become the thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. It should
Totally.
be there to buoy something that's already
Service
working.
the
Right.
narrative.
And they've been layering more and more music over the years too.
True.
And so it's such a crutch.
And it's kind of blended into like today's. I'm not. It's a squishy line. It's not a hard line, but I think a lot of what happens today is like sound design and music have all become sort of the same thing. There's some kind of bed or pad under everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Whether it's just not really musical, but just there's always something seems to be going
Atonal
on.
Is it
synth
like
pads.
an attention span thing? Is it,
I don't know.
Or there are people, or I'm just
Yeah.
old. I'm showing my age. That people aren't comfortable with just
Silence.
like sitting in a room with somebody
Yeah.
without something going on
Yeah.
and talking, having a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't
We're
need
managing
music.
to do it right now. There's no music. And, yeah,
Oh,
you
we're going
might
to put all
some
kinds of music and stuff in here.
You might have to.
Wall to wall. Yeah. You won't
whole
even be able to
thing.
hear us. But it's funny because or at least from my perspective, it does feel like these things kind of run in a weird like pendulum where I'm thinking of a lot of movies, maybe 30s and 40s, pretty heavy music cues.
Yeah, there
even
were,
up into the.
Yeah, we watched a couple old ones not too long ago. We're going, this.
Well,
like
Invasion of the Body Snatchers, 56. Yeah. I think genres maybe sometimes can tip, like, a B movie or sci-fi is going to have heavy
horror movie.
It's weird how these things kind of go in these waves, you know what I mean? But I guess in
probably
general,
examples,
a lot of stuff now.
There's probably examples of both kind of thing now.
Yeah, for sure.
I do want to bring up something when we knew John was going to come on.
Yeah,
you're our first guest, so thank you. We wanted to ask if there was a movie that you wanted to focus on. So John had picked
Miller's Crossing.
Yes,
a favorite of all of us.
Yeah.
So Danny and I rewatched it yesterday, which was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I hadn't seen it in a while.
last weekend.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, so we're all refreshed.
We're all pretty refreshed.
All right, so I got to ask you. We both then we drilled down a little bit and separately did our own research about it. And there's one thing that popped up today that I read that I did not pick up in the movie, and that's that the Dane was lovers with the Steve Buscemi character.
Yeah, there was
I didn't get that.
I asked Dan, I go, did I miss something? And it's not there, at least.
No, it's not.
And
Steve Buscemi,
he's only in one scene.
Yeah.
One scene. He's doing the best Peter Lorre impersonation.
That's exactly what Danny said yesterday.
We literally said the same thing yesterday.
The modern day Peter Lorre.
Yeah, it's like, Rick, you gotta help me, Rick. He's great. He's talking a mile a minute, just a motor mouth.
I did not know that was Mink. I knew they kept referring to that character, and I don't know who that is.
I didn't tell afterwards.
It's complicated. Right. It's telling too, because we both were, again, doing a little homework before this, and I had read the same tidbit that you found, Dad, where the Coens apparently were so kind of bogged down in the plot-based nature of this and all the moving parts and the characters.
And it's heavily based on a Dashiell Hammett novel.
Yes.
Almost the whole plot's been lifted out of the Glass Key.
They were really inspired by, like hard-boiled detective stuff, which you can see it. But they hit like a block where they're like, we don't know where we're going with this. And so they took a break. And in that break, they wrote Barton Fink, which became
in 3 weeks.
Yeah, their next movie.
Oh,
they got stuck in doing the script for Miller's Crossing, and they just got, I don't know, they had an idea and they wrote Barton Fink.
But that must be telling that even they got topsy-turvy in the right, like they probably wrote themselves into.
It's a complex plot.
It's a very structured, highly,
We were, maybe you've got a third opinion on this, because we were both a little foggy. Like I was trying to figure out at the end, what was his play? I don't know what his play was. If it was about Verna, who's
he sort of is a. You think he's got
he basically creates this chaos, and all the things happen to work out the right way, but to what end for him?
Right. Yeah,
because he ends up basically in the same place. He calls that guy after he kills the John Turturro character and says, "I got your money, all of it, and I want to place a bet." Mm-hmm. And that was the end of that. Fades to black, and then there's the little tag at the end at the funeral.
Well, right from the beginning, and they're talking about morality in a gangster film.
Yes. The first scene.
Yeah, it's a question of ethics.
It's a question of ethics. And I think I loved the movie because of just the way it started.
Yeah.
The glass and the whole structure of the opening.
Yeah.
And where you introduce your main character in out of focus in the background. And kind of bring him in and all that
He's the man in the background.
Yep.
And I think it is. I think maybe it was his morality. It was his moral struggle.
Yes.
Like he didn't want to kill the guy, but then he had to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He finally had to.
Yeah.
And
he forced his hand too by not getting out of town.
Yeah.
Yeah. He gave him a chance. Yeah. Plenty of chances.
So he wasn't the equitable man, but he was kind of the closest thing you could be in that kind of morality, in that moral. That world.
They're all swimming in the same water, but
Well, he felt Leo had done some, a bad thing, and he corrected it, but slapped his hand at the end.
He was doing Leo's girlfriend.
Yeah, right.
And
but he does come clean.
I know. We were both.
Could have been a life-ending.
Oh my God!
It was something
reveal.
he struggled with, and you know what? Maybe that's it.
Yeah.
Is that none of us are perfect?
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all flawed. We like to think of ourselves as moral people,
right?
But
everybody.
We're
gray area for sure.
With it.
Yes.
We're all struggling with it.
Yeah.
And there's we all have things we aren't proud of.
Right.
Yeah. But he kind of struggled with it till the end. And I don't even know, did he? I guess he did the right thing. He killed the guy when he needed to be killed. Put everything. He gave up the girl.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, it's like, it's kind of this beautiful ending too, because it leaves you in this note of like, there's a certain uneasiness or unknowability. He says several times in the movie how it's like, you never really know someone, really. You know,
Yeah,
it's
dude,
like,
he says the same line,
Yeah,
exact
twice.
word for word,
Yeah.
twice. He goes, I know him, And he goes, can you really know somebody?
you know? And
Because
it's
he's got
that.
those secrets. He's got the
Yeah,
the
right.
He's got
darkness.
secrets.
And I love too that even in this very plot heavy movie, there's so many moving parts, and Gabriel Byrne's
It's
so
such
good
a
in
love
it.
letter, though, to
Oh, it
the
is. Oh, my
noir
God.
and to all the
Yeah.
hard-boiled detective.
It's a
things.
great looking movie
And it
too.
was
Beautiful.
It wasn't typical. It was about the Irish, mostly Irish.
Yes. Yeah.
And so it was a little, which the music was Irish and that lilty feeling
Yes,
to
yeah.
it. It was
And
all
the
very
theme is
light.
based on an Irish song, a folk
Yeah.
song.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful
It is.
score, it really is.
I mean,
Yeah, Carter Burwell is so good. I love it.
and
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
different from The Godfather, which is
Right.
dark and heavy and
Yeah.
Italian.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it was a different.
It's
a whole
their
different
it's
filter.
their spin. I mean, and also the quintessential Coen. I mean, we kept laughing every time. They to me do violence and moments of explosive violence in like the kind of the most unique way, where there's always some sort of humorous or comedic element, like when the kid finds that guy's body the first,
Yeah.
the
and he
toupee
takes the
and
toupee.
the,
And they took his rug.
Yeah, they refer to it later. He goes, who the fuck does that?
who would do that? Yeah,
I
it was
know.
just a kid and his dog, and then
Yeah,
later
yeah.
when the Dane gets the fire poke in his face,
Right in the
and
face.
that other guy's screaming, and it's just
Yeah,
they
that guy
really-
in the chair, John, that's just going,
For me, I think they're the best craftsmen.
they're
Yes.
just,
that
yeah.
in film. They know how to cut.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, they do.
They know how to compose
Mm-hmm.
a picture.
Yeah.
Composition is always great, and their stories are always good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's why even their bad films.
Yeah. Same. I feel the same way. Like even the stuff that's seen as the
Yeah, the
duds,
Hudsucker,
like,
for me, I mean, I'm sure everybody, that might
Lady
be
Killers.
somebody's famous one, but Hudsucker Proxy I thought didn't quite work.
Yeah.
yeah.
But I love this. And by the way, just before I forget, there was a tidbit we also learned. The reason that the Dane's character is called the Dane, they had a different actor. What was his name?
Peter Stormare, right? Who
He
ended
was
up
supposed
being
to
in
play
Fargo.
the Dane, but he was doing
Yeah.
Hamlet on
Yeah.
Oh,
Broadway, I
that's
think,
funny.
and they refer to that character as the Dane.
Dane.
So they rewrote the
And gave him the last name of Dane.
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed revisiting it because I'm a big fan of theirs, and I hadn't gone back, I think, to sort of the early Coen films for a while, and I forgot this was because I always just assume they were working with Roger Deakins all the time, and there's a good chunk of movies they did with him, but this was still Barry Sonnenfeld, who went on to be a director, and it's a really good looking movie.
Yeah,
it's
it's
just like
really
really
well-
handsomely
beautiful.
shot.
I'd forgotten how pretty it was.
New
Yeah,
Orleans
yeah.
is where they went too, because they said
Yeah,
so much
that's
of
what
that
they
city's
said.
unchanged.
Yeah.
That there were blocks that were all 1920s architecture.
Yeah. And did you catch Sam Raimi's cameo as the guy with the Tommy gun when they're doing the police raid? Remember, there's like that scene where
Somebody comes out of the
they're
bar
coming.
and he's
Yeah.
he starts mowing them down, and then he gets
I remember
riddled
it.
with bullets.
Oh,
That's
okay.
Sam Raimi.
Yeah.
That's funny.
There are a
That-
couple cameo. Oh, the other one was
Oh, yeah.
Albert Finney. You have to tell Joan about that.
Oh
if you
yeah,
don't know
this
about
was another little tidbit thing.
Easter
but
egg.
Albert Finney enjoyed, being on the movie so much. Loved. I mean, we were also remarking that the scene when he, gets one ups the guys that come to get the drop on him, and he's got the Tommy gun
that's
with the
Tommy guns,
cigar.
right.
I mean, I'm like, that's that. I
Yeah,
doubt
the
there's
old
any
guy
male
has to
actor
fight
that
in
doesn't
him
want to
left.
have that
Yeah.
moment, right? Like it's so good. So he loved being on it. He wanted to stick around, and he was just kind of hanging on set. And so they threw him in for a little cameo part where he's cross dressing as an Irish maid in the women's powder room when Gabriel Byrne bursts in.
hysterical.
Yeah,
Yeah, and everybody
you see him in the
walks
corner,
out.
and he's kind of
He
doing like
crosses
a
himself when Gabriel Byrne comes in.
He's got a
and
little
then they
wig
all-
on.
And they
don't
have to
leave.
watch it again just for that.
Yeah.
Daddy
It's
had
really
read that,
good.
so we were looking, and I went, I bet that's the scene, and we backed it up and went there.
It's
he
like
is.
a blink and you'll miss it moment,
Yeah.
but it's really funny. I think he just had so much fun working on it that he wanted to.
I know. I
stand
love
around,
that they
so.
sneak in those little
Yeah,
cameos.
yeah.
He's such a good. I mean, he was such a good. He's such
He's
a
so good.
personality.
I know.
Such a, you don't
Incredible.
have actors like that.
You really don't.
He'd care-
There's
yeah.
and the I don't know the volley between him and Gabriel Byrne too. Just the way like there's such a the performances in that movie in general I think are maybe what stuck with me the most. And Turturro as Bernie.
Oh, he's so
is
good.
so crazy, begging
He's
for his
so
life
good.
and just the.
There was
it's so
another
good.
thing that I found out this morning. Apparently, when Gabriel Byrne was hired, they wanted him to not use an Irish accent, even though the Albert Finney character is Irish. And I think it would have been a mistake because to me sort of explained off camera why there might be this kind of almost like a father-son relationship between the two of them.
Right. Yeah.
So but I guess he convinced them to. I
think I read the same thing.
Dialogue flows better if I use
my
with my own accent, and they went for it. So
no, I'm glad they did.
Good choice.
Yeah. Well, this has been a lovely time chatting.
It has.
It has been fun.
Yeah.
I know. Where are we?
Over an hour, but we're good.
No, that's
I mean, it's good to be over an hour. Yeah. Leave these things a little
So
fat.
take out.
Yeah. Well, everything I say
and everything I say, it'll just be you.
And it's just
one of the cameras is only on you.
Gonna be good.
But so I could speak for both of us. John, thank you for sharing your time with us.
This is a lot of fun.
We should do it again.
I don't think this will be
pick
the
some more
last time.
movies.
I mean, if you enjoyed being here, hopefully we'll get more comfortable chairs next time.
Yeah, we're working
that's
on making this.
Yeah.
I mean, we're limited in what we can poach from the main house.
Exactly.
Right now, too.
They're building our city podcast studio back there.
I don't know. You want to give up. You don't want to give up the charm of.
You're right.
The folding
You're right.
table. It's
Folding
like
table.
it's like
DIY.
the smallest
It's DIY.
production meeting of all time.
Yeah.
I love how the sequencer or the synchronizer made it out here. Yeah.
Dan, why don't you throw us a whip and give us a Timecode
let's,
Cowboy
throw
goodbye.
your whip here. All right, so signing off, another great episode from the Timecode Cowboys. We've really enjoyed our time with our guest,
John Heath,
Mr. John Heath. And
director, producer, editor,
multi-hyphenate, extraordinary.
And like
That
Danny and I,
almost sounds dirty, though.
You're right.
only in the best possible way.
Only in the Hollywood way.
Yeah.
But until next time, it's been a
Timecode
blast.
Cowboys.
Adios.
Adios.